The unexpected refusal. Maya Harris had been looking forward to this moment for weeks. After a long deployment overseas, the black soldier was finally heading home. She had worked hard, completed her mission, and now it was time for a break. She stood in the bustling airport terminal, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, as she looked at her flight information. It had been a grueling month, and this flight home was the one thing that had kept her going. She made her way to the check-in counter, where a friendly clerk greeted her. "Hello, ma'am. Welcome back," the clerk said with a smile as she scanned Maya's ticket. "Thanks," Maya replied, her eyes tired but excited. She had been looking forward to the comfort of her first-class seat. It was a treat for herself after everything she had been through, something she could finally look forward to after months of hard work. Maya handed over her ticket and waited for the clerk to give her boarding pass. But something seemed off. The clerk hesitated, staring at the screen in confusion. Maya shifted her weight, unsure of what was happening. She had checked her flight status a few times before arriving at the airport, and everything seemed fine. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's an issue with your seat," the clerk said finally, looking uncomfortable. "It appears there's been a mix-up. Your first-class seat has been reassigned to another passenger." Maya blinked, unsure of what she had just heard. "Reassigned?" she repeated, her voice rising slightly. "But I paid for that seat. I have a first-class ticket." The clerk nodded apologetically. "I understand, but there's nothing I can do at this point. I can offer you a seat in economy class." Maya's heart sank. She was stunned. This was a mistake, right? Her fingers tightened around the ticket, and she felt a growing sense of frustration. But she took a deep breath and forced herself to stay calm. There was no point in making a scene. She had learned that long ago. As a soldier, she was used to difficult situations. But this was different. Maya tried to keep her voice steady. "So, you're saying I don't get the seat I paid for?" The clerk gave her an apologetic smile but remained firm. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I wish I could do more. Would you like to take the economy seat?" Maya stared at the clerk for a moment, unsure what to do. She had been looking forward to the comfort of first class, especially after such a tough mission. But it seemed like there was no choice. With a sigh, she nodded. "Fine," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll take the economy seat." The clerk printed a new boarding pass and handed it over. "I'm very sorry again, Mom." Maya forced a smile, though she couldn't shake the feeling of being dismissed. As she walked away from the counter, she couldn't help but feel a sting of humiliation. She had served her country with honor, had given so much, and now she was being treated like this. It didn't seem right. She made her way to the gate, her thoughts swirling. There were plenty of empty seats in first class. She had seen them while waiting in line. Why was her seat reassigned? Why was she being treated this way? As she boarded the plane, Maya tried to shake off the feeling of disappointment. She walked past the first-class cabin, her eyes catching the luxurious seats, the plush chairs, the wide windows, and the smiles from the first-class passengers. It was everything she had hoped for after months of hardship. But now, it seemed like it was out of reach. Maya took her seat in economy, her bag placed at her feet. She buckled her seatbelt and tried to focus on the flight ahead. She didn't want to make a scene. After all, it was just a seat, right? But as the plane filled up, she couldn't help but feel like something wasn't right. People glanced at her, some of them whispering, some of them staring at her military uniform. Maya felt the weight of their gazes, and it made her uncomfortable. As she settled in, an elderly woman sitting next to her looked at Maya with concern. "Is everything all right, dear?" the woman asked gently, noticing the tension in Maya's shoulders. Maya forced a smile. "I'm fine, just tired." The elderly woman nodded sympathetically. "I've been traveling a lot myself," she said, "and I know how stressful it can be. But I hope everything goes well for you." "Thanks," Maya replied quietly, grateful for the small kindness. As the flight continued, whispers began to spread throughout the economy section. A few passengers had noticed the mix-up and were muttering among themselves. Some of them began speaking out loud, expressing disbelief at how a soldier, of all people, had been treated this way. Maya sat quietly, trying to ignore the whispers, but it was hard. She knew she had every right to be upset. She was a soldier, someone who had served her country with pride and dignity. She had earned that first-class seat, but now she was just another passenger, sitting among strangers, feeling the weight of their judgment. Then, out of the corner of her eye, Maya saw something unexpected. A man in a business suit stood up and walked towards the front of the plane. He had heard the whispers too, and he was determined to do something about it. Maya watched as the man approached the flight attendants, his voice low but firm. The attendants looked startled, but they didn't argue. Maya couldn't hear the conversation, but she had a feeling the man was speaking up on her behalf. For the first time since the seat mix-up, Maya felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone would make this right. But little did she know, this was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that would not only change the course of the flight, but would also show the world what it meant to stand up for what was right. The mysterious intervention. The plane's engines roared to life, signaling that they were soon going to take off. Maya's heart was still heavy from the earlier incident. She stared out of the small window, trying to distract herself. As the world below them shrank in size, the cabin became quieter, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling of disappointment. She had worked so hard, only to be dismissed in front of everyone. The first-class seat had felt like a small victory after everything she had been through. Now, it seemed so far out of reach, a reminder of the injustice she had just faced. The whispers in the economy section had gradually died down as the plane leveled out and settled into the sky, but Maya still felt the sting of humiliation. She glanced around, noticing that most of the passengers had already settled in for the long flight. They were busy with their own activities, reading, chatting, and watching movies, but Maya couldn't bring herself to relax. That was when she noticed the man in the business suit again. He was seated a few rows ahead of her, and he had been watching her closely for a while. He had dark, sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything around him, and a calm, assured demeanor. There was something about him that made Maya feel like he was more than just another businessman. Something about the way he carried himself suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. The man's eyes briefly met Maya's, and he gave her a subtle nod. It was small, but there was something in it that made her feel like she wasn't alone. She hadn't expected to see someone taking her side in this crowded airplane. Most of the passengers had been silent or indifferent, but this man seemed to be watching, waiting for the right moment to act. Maya turned her gaze back out the window, unsure of what to make of it. Maybe it was nothing. She had seen people stare at her before, especially when she was in her uniform, but this felt different. Something told her this man wasn't just another curious passenger. Just as she was about to return to her thoughts, the flight attendants came through the aisle with their usual service. They stopped by Maya's row to offer drinks and snacks. The elderly woman next to her smiled kindly, asking for a cup of tea. Maya nodded politely and accepted a bottle of water, still lost in her thoughts. And then, as if on cue, the man in the business suit stood up again. He didn't seem to hesitate. He walked toward the front of the plane, his movements confident and deliberate. Maya's eyes followed him, wondering what he was doing. She couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity and hope. Something about him felt different. The flight attendants exchanged quick glances as the man approached them. They clearly recognized him, and for a moment, they looked uncomfortable. Maya leaned forward slightly, straining to hear what was being said, but the man's voice was low, too quiet for her to make out. Still, there was no mistaking the authority in the way he spoke. The flight attendants nodded at him, seemingly agreeing with whatever he had said, but they didn't seem happy about it. Maya watched with growing intrigue. Who was this man? And why did the staff look so uneasy? She had a feeling that whatever was happening, it had something to do with her. Just as she was about to ask herself what was going on, The man turned and walked back down the aisle toward his seat. His eyes briefly met hers again, and this time he offered her a small, reassuring smile. Maya couldn't help but feel a little better, though she still had no idea what was going on. But there was something in his eyes that made her think he was about to make things right. Moments later, the flight attendants returned to their usual tasks, but Maya could sense that something had shifted. The atmosphere on the plane had changed, and she couldn't quite put her finger on it. It wasn't just the strange interaction with the staff. It was the way the passengers were looking at her now. Some were still staring, but now there was a different look in their eyes. It was as if they had become aware of the situation in a way they hadn't before. Maya sat back in her seat, trying to stay calm. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but she had a feeling that her journey wasn't going to be the same. Something had shifted in the air, and she couldn't help but wonder if the man in the business suit had something to do with it. As the flight continued, Maya found herself looking around at the passengers, wondering who would stand up for her next. Would anyone else speak up, or would it be up to the mysterious man to make things right? She wasn't sure, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let this injustice go unnoticed. Something told her that by the end of this flight, everything would change. And little did Maya know, this was only the beginning of a story that would make waves far beyond the cabin of this airplane. The actions of one man were about to spark a chain of events that would change everything for her. And for the passengers on this flight, the question remained, what would happen next? And who else would step in to make sure Maya's rights were upheld? The power play. As the flight continued its steady course through the sky, Maya felt a sense of nervous excitement building within her. The mysterious man's actions were puzzling, yet strangely comforting. She had no idea who he was, but there was something about the way he carried himself, something about the way he had commanded the attention of the flight attendants, that made her believe that he was no ordinary passenger. He wasn't just another wealthy businessman heading to a meeting. No, there was something deeper at play here. Maya couldn't ignore the nagging question at the back of her mind. What exactly did he want? She kept her eyes fixed on him as he settled back into his seat. From her vantage point, she could see that he wasn't paying attention to his in-flight entertainment or any of the usual distractions. Instead, he had his eyes closed, his hands resting on his lap, looking like he was simply biding his time. It was then that a subtle shift occurred. Maya had noticed it earlier, how the other passengers now looked at her with an almost unspoken understanding. But it became clearer now. Whispers began to spread throughout the economy section, like an invisible current moving through the cabin. People were talking. Passengers who had previously been immersed in their own worlds were now looking up, sneaking glances at Maya. The strange thing was, it wasn't the kind of look that came from pity or ridicule. It was a quiet, almost respectful curiosity. And with each passing moment, Maya felt the weight of all those eyes on her. She wasn't sure whether it was the result of the altercation she had with the gate attendant earlier, or if it had something to do with the man in the business suit. But one thing was clear. Something had changed. And it wasn't just her. It was the entire flight. Maya shifted in her seat uneasily. It felt like the calm before a storm, like something big was about to happen. She noticed that a few passengers were now even eyeing the business class section, their gazes lingering on the velvet curtains separating the two classes. The divide between the luxurious first-class seats and the cramped, slightly worn-out economy seats had always been there, but now it felt like a glaring symbol of injustice. Was this all happening because of what had transpired earlier? Had the way she had been treated at check-in, the dismissal of her rights, sparked something in the other passengers? Maya wasn't sure, but the sense of tension in the air was undeniable. It was then that Maya caught a glimpse of something that made her stomach turn. One of the flight attendants was approaching her aisle again, but this time she wasn't carrying snacks or drinks. Instead, she seemed to be walking with purpose, her eyes scanning the rows as if she were looking for something or someone. Maya's heart skipped a beat. Was she coming for her again? But then the flight attendant stopped. She hesitated as she reached the row where Maya sat, glancing over her shoulder. seemingly waiting for something. It was then that the man in the business suit stood up. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The man, calm as ever, moved swiftly down the aisle, his eyes locked with the flight attendants. As he passed the rows of passengers, Maya could see the subtle shift in the atmosphere. A few people whispered, others simply watched him, but none of them dared to speak out. It was as though they all knew something was about to happen, and they were waiting in anticipation. The flight attendant didn't move, but the man didn't stop either. He stopped right in front of her, standing tall and unyielding. There was an unmistakable tension in the air. For a moment, it felt like the entire flight had come to a standstill. Maya watched, her pulse quickening. What was going to happen? She couldn't look away. The flight attendant swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly as she looked up at the man in front of her. For a long moment, there was silence. Maya could hear the soft hum of the plane's engines, the soft murmur of voices around her, but nothing could drown out the quiet that had fallen over the cabin. Then the man spoke. His voice was low and controlled, but there was no mistaking the authority in it. "I believe the lady in the economy section has been treated unfairly," he said, his words carrying through the quiet cabin. "I suggest you make arrangements for her to be moved to her rightful seat." Maya's heart raced as the flight attendant's face turned pale. She was clearly caught off guard, and for a moment, it looked like she didn't know how to respond. But the man didn't budge. His posture was firm, and his gaze was unwavering. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and all Maya could do was watch, breathless, as the situation unfolded before her. The flight attendant quickly regained her composure and nodded, but the look in her eyes was one of unease. She turned toward the front of the plane, making her way to the cockpit. Maya barely dared to breathe. Had this mysterious man really just intervened on her behalf? Was he about to make sure that she would get the seat she deserved? Her mind was racing, but before she could process the situation any further, the flight attendant returned, her face pale, but her eyes no longer avoiding Maya's. "Please follow me," she said quietly, her voice now much softer than before. Maya's heart leaped. She stood, still not quite believing what was happening, and followed the flight attendant toward the front of the plane. As she passed the rows of passengers, she could feel their eyes on her again, but this time it was different. There was no judgment, no whispers, just silent acknowledgement. When Maya reached the front of the plane, she was ushered into the first-class section, where the seat she had been denied earlier awaited her. As she sat down, the soft leather welcoming her, she looked out the window in disbelief. Her heart was still pounding, but now it was a feeling of triumph, a feeling she hadn't expected to feel today. The man in the business suit, still seated in the business class section, glanced at her one last time. His eyes met hers with a knowing look, as if saying, "You're not alone." And for the first time since boarding the plane, Maya felt like everything was going to be okay. A twist of fate. Maya settled into the plush seat of the first-class cabin, her heart still racing from the unexpected turn of events. It all felt surreal. Just moments ago, she had been sitting in the cramped economy section, staring at the back of a chair that was too close, too uncomfortable. Now, here she was, in a seat designed for comfort, a seat she had never imagined she would occupy. The flight attendant, who had led her to the front, lingered nearby, seemingly unsure of what to do. Maya's mind was still buzzing with questions. Who was this man in the business suit? What made him stand up for her? Why had he done it? She looked over at him, still sitting calmly in his seat, as if nothing unusual had just happened. He was gazing out of the window, a quiet air of confidence around him. Maya couldn't help herself. She had to know more. As she turned toward the flight attendant, she caught a glimpse of the nervous tension in the woman's eyes. Maya could feel the weight of the woman's discomfort. The tension was palpable in the air, and she had to ask, "Is everything okay?" Maya asked, her voice soft but curious. The flight attendant glanced around before answering. She hesitated before speaking, clearly trying to find the right words. "It's just, I've never seen anything like this before. The way he handled things, the way he spoke. She trailed off, looking toward the man in the business suit. He's not just any passenger, that's for sure. Maya's curiosity deepened. Who was this man? What made him stand out in such a way that he could influence the entire situation with just a few words? As she sat there, her thoughts racing, the flight attendant left her to settle into her seat. Maya glanced over at the man again, still lost in thought. He was reading something on his tablet now, his expression unreadable. It was as if the entire world was passing by him, but he was unaffected. Maya's fingers toyed with the armrest, a feeling of unease washing over her. Her moment of victory felt hollow, like it wasn't quite real yet. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something, that something big was happening, and she didn't know what it was. Suddenly, she heard a voice from behind her. "Excuse me," a woman's voice called out. Maya turned, startled to see a middle-aged woman standing in the aisle. The woman had a slight smile on her face, but there was something in her eyes that hinted at an urgent need to speak. "May I sit with you for a moment?" Maya nodded, a little confused. "Of course," she replied. The woman smiled and took the seat beside her, glancing over her shoulder as if making sure no one else was watching. When she turned back to Maya, her face was serious. "You're probably wondering about the man in the business suit," the woman began, her voice hushed. "Aren't you?" Maya's heart skipped a beat. How did she know? Yes, I'm curious. Who is he?" Maya asked, her voice betraying her eagerness. The woman looked around again, as if to ensure no one was eavesdropping. She leaned closer, speaking in a near whisper. "His name is Mr. Edward Hayes," she said, her eyes darting nervously. "And you don't want to get on his bad side." Maya frowned, trying to make sense of the situation. "But why did he help me? He didn't know me." The woman shook her head slowly, her face serious. "Mr. Hayes is a man of influence, but he doesn't just help people for the sake of it. He helps those who deserve it, those who are being mistreated or overlooked. He has a way of knowing when things are wrong, and he has the power to fix them, sometimes in ways you wouldn't expect." Maya was speechless. The man she had thought was just a wealthy businessman was someone much more powerful, someone who seemed to be always watching, always aware of what was going on around him. It was as though he had the world figured out, like he could see beyond the surface of things and know what truly mattered. The woman continued, her voice lowering further. "Be careful. Mr. Hayes doesn't do favors without expecting something in return. He's got his reasons for everything." Maya's mind was spinning. What had she just stepped into? Why had Mr. Hayes chosen to step in for her? She hadn't asked for help, and yet he had done it, without hesitation, without even a second thought. But that wasn't the only thing that troubled Maya. What did the woman mean by expecting something in return? Was she now caught in some kind of debt to this mysterious stranger? The thought made her uneasy. Before Maya could ask more questions, the woman stood up, her face shifting back to a neutral expression. "I think that's enough for now," she said with a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "But keep your eyes open. Mr. Hayes is more than just a passenger on this plane. He's got a purpose." The woman walked away, leaving Maya in a whirl of thoughts. She didn't know what to think. Was Mr. Hayes truly someone who only helped those who deserved it, or was there more to him than met the eye? Maya's attention was drawn back to the man in the business suit. He was still sitting quietly, his eyes now scanning something on his tablet. But now, in the light of the woman's cryptic warning, Maya couldn't help but wonder if there was more to this man than she had first realized. What did he want from her? Was this really the beginning of something, or had she just stumbled into something much bigger than she could have ever imagined? As the plane cruised on, the mystery of Edward Hayes deepened, and Maya's heart pounded as she realized that her journey was only just beginning. The mysterious invitation. Maya sat in her first-class seat, her mind racing. The words of the woman who had spoken to her earlier echoed in her mind. "Be careful. Mr. Hayes doesn't do favors without expecting something in return." What did that mean? Was this just a random act of kindness, or was she now tangled in something far deeper? The rest of the flight passed in a blur. Maya found it hard to focus on anything else. The luxury of her seat, the comfort of the meal, the attentiveness of the flight attendants, all of it seemed irrelevant now. Her thoughts kept returning to the man in the business suit, Mr. Edward Hayes. She glanced at him again. He was still engrossed in his tablet, but there was a certain air of confidence around him, almost as if he knew things about the world that no one else did. Was he a billionaire? A politician? A powerful businessman? Or was he someone even more influential, someone who operated behind the scenes? It wasn't until the plane began its descent that Maya's mind was interrupted by a soft voice. Maya, right. It was the flight attendant, standing beside her with a polite but concerned smile. Maya blinked, taken off guard. She hadn't realized anyone had been paying attention to her, but here the flight attendant was asking her name. She nodded, a little confused. Yes, that's me. How can I help? The flight attendant lowered her voice, glancing around nervously. Mr. Hayes wants to speak with you after we land. Maya's heart skipped a beat. Mr. Hayes. Why did he want to speak with her? Was this it? Was this the moment where everything would be revealed? She had so many questions, but all of them seemed to fade into the background as she tried to process what the flight attendant had just said. The woman continued, her voice barely audible. Don't worry. It's nothing bad, I think, but he said it's very important. Before Maya could respond, the flight attendant was gone, leaving her alone with her swirling thoughts. What was this meeting about? Why had Mr. Hayes specifically asked for her? The rest of the flight was a blur, but it didn't matter. Maya's mind was fixed on the conversation she had yet to have. As the plane touched down, she felt a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety. The world around her seemed to move in slow motion as she gathered her belongings. Once the plane came to a stop, the passengers began to stand and gather their things, but Maya lingered. She was too nervous to leave the seat just yet. What if she was walking into a trap? What if this was all part of something she couldn't yet understand? Or perhaps, was this a chance for something bigger? A chance to learn more about the mysterious world Mr. Hayes seemed to inhabit? She was startled when the flight attendant returned, a polite but firm smile on her face. Mr. Hayes is waiting for you, Maya. If you follow me, please. Maya hesitated. This was it. The moment she had been dreading, or waiting for, had arrived. She gathered her things and stood up, her knees slightly shaky. The flight attendant led her off the plane, through the jet bridge, and into the terminal. It was a strange feeling, walking through the bustling airport with everyone around her oblivious to what was unfolding. They were all in their own world, unaware of the mysterious encounter that was about to take place. Maya felt as though she was walking in a dream, her surroundings distant and unreal. Finally, they reached a small lounge area, tucked away from the main crowd. It was quiet here, and the moment Maya stepped inside, she spotted Mr. Hayes sitting by a table. He looked up when she entered, a slight smile on his face, but there was something behind his eyes, something that told her this meeting would not be like any other she had experienced. Please, have a seat, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Maya sat down slowly, still unsure of what to expect. Mr. Hayes didn't speak immediately, instead taking a moment to assess her, as if reading her thoughts. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm, but with a weight to it. Maya, I hope you're not too alarmed by all of this. I assure you, there's no reason to be. I simply wanted to have a conversation with you. Maya wasn't sure if she was supposed to feel relieved or more anxious, but her curiosity got the better of her. What kind of conversation? Mr. Hayes's smile didn't falter, but there was a glint in his eyes that made her uneasy. Let's just say that I have an interest in people who are often overlooked, people who go unnoticed in the world. People like you. I saw something in you today that I haven't seen in a long time. Maya's heart skipped a beat. What did he see in her? He continued, his gaze steady. I don't expect anything from you right now. But I would like to offer you an opportunity that could change everything for you. Your life could be very different if you choose to accept it. Maya felt her pulse quicken. This was it, the moment that could change the course of her life. But she still didn't know what the opportunity was. Was this just a game to him? Or was this an actual chance to change everything, as he said? Before she could ask more questions, he leaned forward slightly, his voice soft but intense. The choice is yours, Maya. But know this, you won't get another chance like this again. Maya's head was spinning. The invitation had been extended, and now the ball was in her court. What would she do? Should she trust him? Or was this all part of a larger game, one she didn't understand yet? As she sat there, Mr. Hayes's words echoed in her mind. This could change everything. But was she ready for whatever came next? The invitation. Maya's heart raced as she sat across from Mr. Hayes in the private lounge, trying to process the weight of his words. The choice is yours, Maya, he had said, but what did it really mean? He had already promised an opportunity, one that could change her life. But how could she trust him? This man, who seemed to be powerful enough to bend rules and make things happen with just a look, was offering her something she couldn't quite understand. She looked at him closely now, trying to decipher the meaning behind his calm demeanor and penetrating eyes. He was waiting for her answer, his fingers lightly tapping the surface of the table. The air between them felt thick, charged with expectation. Maya opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was stuck, overwhelmed by the possibilities, and unsure of how to move forward. The silence stretched on, filling the space with tension. Finally, she cleared her throat, trying to find the right words. "What kind of opportunity are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" Mr. Hayes smiled slightly, his eyes still locked on hers. "It's not about what I want from you, Maya," he said softly. "It's about what you want for yourself. You've spent your whole life fighting against the odds, haven't you? Your strength, your perseverance, those things didn't go unnoticed today. But what if you could do more? What if you could stand on a bigger stage and show the world just how powerful you are?" Maya frowned, unsure of where this conversation was headed. Her mind flashed back to the rejection she'd faced earlier in the flight, the way she had been humiliated by the flight attendant, and the frustration that had followed. She had fought hard all her life to prove herself, to rise above the struggles of her past. But was Mr. Hayes offering her something worth fighting for? "And what's the catch?" she asked, her suspicion creeping in. "There's always a catch." Mr. Hayes leaned back in his chair, a knowing smile spreading across his face. "I won't lie to you, Maya. There are things that come with this opportunity, but they are all things that you control. You decide how much you want to be involved. All I'm offering is a door, and you're the one who gets to choose whether to walk through it." Maya's eyes narrowed. The mysteriousness of his words only made her more uneasy. What could this door be? And what would happen once she stepped through? The thought of change, of stepping into something unknown, was both exhilarating and terrifying. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said, her voice steady despite the churn of emotions in her chest. "You're a stranger. I don't know what your intentions are." "I understand," Mr. Hayes said, his tone sincere. "Trust is earned, not given. But what if I told you I've been watching you for a while? I've seen the way you carry yourself, the way you handle adversity. You're not like everyone else. You're different, Maya. And that's exactly why you have the potential for something bigger." His words hung in the air like a challenge, daring her to take a chance. Maya was taken aback. How long had he been watching her? Had this all been part of some plan from the start? The idea of someone tracking her every move made her skin crawl, but at the same time, a part of her couldn't deny the truth in his words. The weight of the moment settled on her shoulders. If she accepted his offer, she was stepping into a world she didn't fully understand. It would mean leaving behind everything she knew, everything she had built. But if she refused, Would she be turning down the very thing she had been waiting for her whole life? Maya's mind raced as she considered her options: the flight, the seat, the conversation with the flight attendant. It all felt like fate, like some strange series of events leading her here, to this very moment. Mr. Hayes's voice broke through her thoughts. "You're afraid. I can see it. And that's okay. But fear is a natural response when you're standing on the edge of something new. It's how you handle that fear that defines who you become." Maya took a deep breath. She had always prided herself on her ability to face challenges head-on, to keep moving forward no matter the obstacles. But this was different. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. This was about choosing a path she hadn't even considered. "Tell me what this opportunity is," she said finally, her voice firmer now. "What exactly are you offering?" Mr. Hayes leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "I can offer you influence, power, and connections, things that most people can only dream of. But it comes at a price, Maya. The question is, are you willing to pay it?" Maya's heart pounded in her chest as his words sank in. Power, influence, connections, everything she had ever wanted to escape the struggles of her life. But at what cost? What would she have to give up in return for all of this? And how far would she have to go to prove she was worthy of it? She stood up abruptly, her legs trembling as she fought to steady herself. "I need time," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I need to think about this." Mr. Hayes nodded, a look of understanding crossing his face. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But remember, opportunities like this don't wait forever. The choice will always be yours, Maya. Just know that once you make it, there's no turning back." Maya turned and walked away, her mind racing with the weight of the decision ahead of her. She had been given a chance, but the path before her was shrouded in mystery, and the unknown could be both a gift and a curse. What would she choose? The invitation had been made. The question now was whether Maya was ready to accept it, and what the consequences of that choice would be. The last laugh. Maya stood before the grand building, her mind swirling with a mix of excitement and doubt. The day had come. The choice she had made weeks ago was now real. This was the beginning of everything she had been promised, everything she had hoped for. But deep down, she still wondered, was it worth it? She walked through the tall glass doors of the sleek corporate building, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the lobby. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she tried to hide it behind a confident facade. After all, she had made her decision. She had chosen to embrace the opportunity Mr. Hayes had presented her. She had chosen to step through that door, and there was no going back now. Her first meeting was scheduled with a group of executives who had been briefed about her and her background. They had already heard the story of the woman who had been rejected from the first-class seat and had ended up gaining an invitation to a world she had never imagined. But now it was time for Maya to prove herself, to show that she was more than just a story, more than just a symbol of resistance. She had to show them who she truly was. She entered the conference room, where a group of well-dressed men and women sat around a polished table. They all looked up as she walked in, their expressions unreadable. Maya took a deep breath and sat down, her back straight, her eyes focused. This was her moment. "We're all eager to hear your thoughts, Miss Carter," one of the executives said, his voice calm and professional. Maya nodded, then stood up, her palms slightly sweating as she began to speak. "I wasn't always someone who had a seat at the table," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves. "I wasn't always someone who was given the opportunity to speak. But every moment of my life has been a battle, whether it was on that airplane or every other obstacle I faced. I fought for everything I've achieved, and I'm not afraid to keep fighting." She paused, letting the words sink in. She could see the glint of curiosity in their eyes. They were listening now. "I don't just want to be here because of what happened on that flight," she continued. "I'm here because I've earned it, and I want to make an impact. I want to prove that people like me, people who have been overlooked, people who have been rejected, deserve to be heard." The room fell silent, and for a moment, Maya wondered if she had said too much. But then one of the executives, a woman with sharp features and piercing eyes, spoke up. "You're bold, Maya. I like that," she said, her tone almost approving. "But what you don't realize is that it's not enough to simply be bold. You have to have a plan. You have to know how to turn that fire into something that will drive results." Maya's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. She had done her research. She knew the issues. She understood the stakes. She wasn't just here for show. "I do have a plan," Maya said, her voice growing more confident. "I've spent my life navigating systems that were never built for me. But I've learned how to work within them, how to push back, and how to create space where none existed before. That's what I can bring to the table. And I'm ready to use every skill I've developed to make a real difference." Another executive spoke up, his voice full of skepticism. "But do you really think you can make a difference? You've been fighting against the system your entire life. What makes you think this time will be different?" Maya looked around the room, her eyes meeting each of theirs. The weight of their doubt, of their skepticism, pressed heavily on her, but she refused to let it crush her. "I don't need anyone to believe in me," she said quietly, yet firmly. "I believe in myself, and that's enough." There was a long pause as the executives exchanged glances, considering her words. Finally, the woman with the piercing eyes nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "All right, Miss Carter," she said. "Let's see what you can do." Maya's heart raced with a mixture of relief and adrenaline. She had done it. She had earned their attention. But this was just the beginning. The real challenge was only just starting. She had to prove herself, not just to these people, but to the world. As she left the room, she felt a sense of empowerment that she had never experienced before. She had walked in a stranger, unsure of what the future held. But now she was ready. She was going to use every ounce of strength she had to fight for a place at the table, and to show the world that her story, her fight, was far from over. Maya glanced around at the sleek walls of the building. The corporate world might have once seemed like a distant dream, a place where people like her had no space. But now she was part of it. She had carved out her own place, and there was no going back. And as she stepped out of the building and into the unknown, she couldn't help but smile. She had been denied a seat at the front of the plane. But now she had something far more valuable, a future. And this time, no one was going to take it from her.